To every one that hath, more shall be given, and he shall have an abundance. But from he who hath not shall be taken away, even that which he hath. Matthew 35:39. A quote that's often used to describe how the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, but it also applies to education. You see, those who have an ease at learning to read early on will often go on to great academic success, but those who struggle, those who find those first initial steps incredibly difficult, will actually drop out of school at a much higher rate than their contemporaries. And for dyslexics, for whom learning to read is often a very serious challenge, this problem is compounded by other difficulties, like difficulty paying attention, difficulty learning procedural tasks, and difficulty rote learning anything. And so for dyslexic students, school can be an incredibly difficult place to fit in. But it doesn't necessarily have to be this way. And in fact, recent research is showing that dyslexia actually has upsides. My own personal story of dyslexia is an unusual one. See, I don't have any trouble reading or spelling. And so my underlying dyslexic traits, I have a really hard time paying attention in school. It took me forever to learn how to tie my shoelaces. These underlying traits were hidden by the fact that my teachers couldn't give me enough to read. And so this phenomenon is now being called stealth dyslexia, and it's indicating that actually many more people than realize it are dyslexic. I mean, as a child, I loved school. It was one of my favorite places to be. I got every book on astronomy I could find. I knew the order of the planets before I knew the order of the colors in the rainbow. I would run around fields with a little specimen jar trying to catch grasshoppers and never caught one. And I was obsessed with everything to do with science. I wandered into a library when I was 8 years old and asked for a book on quantum physics. I had no idea what it was. And so when it came to secondary school, I was so excited. It was going to be this place where I was going to be able to do all these things that I'd read about, but in so much more detail. And then I got there. And suddenly I found that actually the way that I wanted to learn was not even remotely compatible with how I had to. My teachers would tell me that the things that I wanted to learn weren't covered until A-level. And so at 11 years old, I would have to wait. And this story continued that it didn't matter how hard I tried in school, what I gave was never really what was asked for. And as a matter of fact, it didn't matter what I tried, even with the things that I was really good at, I found it really hard to excel. And in fact, it wasn't until one of my teachers found that when he gave me nonsensical German sentences, things like, I have a snake in my trousers, and got me to translate them, suddenly something clicked. And it was amazing. Suddenly all of this education that I wanted was there for me, but only when it was translated into something that I was able to deal with. But you see, I was one of the lucky ones. So many dyslexics never get that opportunity to find the things that they're good at. And instead, they'll drop out of school, never realizing that the way their brain works gives them unique skills and abilities. And see, part of the trouble is that even the help that we give to dyslexics ends up being something that does more harm than good. It can be compared to trying to force a square peg through a round hole. You might make it fit, but it'll never fit perfectly. And imagine what damage is done in the process. You see, dyslexia is a problem that stems from a difference in brain structure. It's just a handful of things that, when in combination, can create problems in school. But these things aren't defects, as some would think. They're actually trade-offs. You see, dyslexic brains give up ability in certain areas in order to excel in others. So for instance, tying shoelaces. It's something to do with procedural learning. And so dyslexics find it very hard to learn how to do a given task repeatedly. But because they find it so hard, they often find innovations in those processes and find new and better ways of doing them. Another difference is that the cortex in the dyslexic brain, the neurons in the cortex, are more widely spaced apart. And so it makes fine detail processing very difficult. I mean, when I was asked the question, where's Wally? My answer was always, I have no idea. But when it came to things like seeing the connections between different ideas, seeing the bigger picture, seeing the greater theme, suddenly that was something that I was able to do, as many other dyslexics are able to. And so part of the challenge is that no two dyslexics are the same. And so not only are all of our challenges very different, but also all of our strengths are very different. And it's up to us to try and figure out what those things are and how we can develop them. And equally, it's up to our teachers and to our families and to our friends to help us identify those things. and to say, well, yeah, maybe you have a problem over here, but maybe over here is something that you can really be good at. And to help with this, Drs. Brock and Finette-Eide have developed something they call their MIND framework, or MIND, for material, interconnected, narrative, and dynamic reasoning, as things that dyslexics tend to be naturally quite good at. Generally speaking, not all dyslexics will be good at all of them, but all will have at least one. So material reasoning, being good at dealing with the physical world, interconnected, seeing the connection between things, narrative, placing things into stories. I mean, most people wouldn't think of dyslexics as being particularly good authors, but strangely they are. And dynamic reasoning, which is the use of something called episodic simulation to predict how past and future events will occur. Something that's actually incredibly useful for entrepreneurs. And in fact, the connection between dyslexia and entrepreneurship is so strong that it's estimated that up to a third or a half of all entrepreneurs in the US are dyslexic. And so perhaps it's the case that people can succeed not in spite of their dyslexia, but because of it. And in fact, when we look at the great minds from history who have been dyslexic, themes start to occur. Da Vinci, could he have been such a skilled or accomplished inventor without an ability to see how things interconnected and related to each other? Could Einstein have changed so fundamentally the way we think about physics if he hadn't been able to see things from different perspectives? And would Bill Gates or Richard Branson have been such incredible business leaders if they hadn't been able to see gaps in the market and see what things could meet those needs? In fact, this link between dyslexia and great achievement is so strong that it's almost inescapable in popular culture. I'm not sure if you remember the Apple adverts from the late 1990s, which challenged us to think different, and where they said, it's the crazy ones, it's the one people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world who actually do. They showed a montage of 17 different great minds like Muhammad Ali or Thomas Edison who changed the world. And they found that actually 11 out of those 17 had some kind of dyslexia. In fact, even Steve Jobs was dyslexic. And so perhaps the challenge is not for us to expect the school system to change to suit us. Maybe instead it's time for dyslexics to find the things that they're good at and develop them for themselves, so that instead of trying to fit in with everybody else, we can find something that we're good at. And so it seems like not a day goes by that the world is not making a new cry for innovation or more entrepreneurship. And it seems like maybe this is something that dyslexics can help with, but only if we embrace the difference rather than trying to correct it. And so I'd like to finish with a quote that's often been attributed to a great mind who is often thought to have been dyslexic, Albert Einstein. Everybody is a genius, but if we judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it'll spend its entire life believing itself to be stupid. So perhaps as dyslexics, we need to leave the tree climbing to somebody else and get on with the important business of swimming. Thank you very much.